Good morning and welcome to Quick Take Charge. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York on this Thursday morning. We're going to discuss the billions of dollars of potential in femtech in just a few minutes, but we're beginning this morning with the story breaking social media by none other than Elon Musk. Musk has offered $43 billion to buy Twitter just weeks after disclosing a major stake in the social platform. The Tesla CEO is currently worth about $260 billion, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, compared with Twitter's market valuation of about $37 billion. So why exactly does Elon want Twitter? After all, one of his recent tweets suggested Twitter might be dying, given that several celebrities with high follower counts rarely even post. So we're very fortunate to have Quick Take's Alex Webb in London for us, who has been covering tech for Bloomberg for a number of years and has been covering this story all morning. So Alex, thanks for joining us. So first of all, Elon Musk said he wants to fix Twitter, or in his words, unlock its potential. Can you just dissect what exactly that means in your mind?
I mean, I'm glad you added that suffix in my mind, because goodness only knows what it means in his mind. He talks about unlocking potential. He talks about making it a platform for free speech. You can also look at the financials, and I was digging into this just now. Facebook is significantly bigger. It's got two more meta platforms, I ought to say. It's got something like 1.9 billion users across its family of apps. But more significantly than that, it makes a lot more money from each user. It makes about $35 in profit, or at least last year, from every user. Twitter makes about $9 in profit for each of its 217 million users. So it's considerably smaller, and it's making less money from that. So the upside for Elon, maybe yes, it's partly about adding new users, but I would say the bigger opportunity is extracting more value from those users. Now, that obviously primarily comes in ads. But the other thing Twitter has been building up is more subscription products. And so we'll have to see where he falls within those two ideas.
But he's talked a lot about free speech, Alex, and we saw that in his letter today. But if they're also talking about subscription at the same time, how do those two things go hand in hand? How do they make that work?
Well, you know, we've seen the explosion of products like Substack, where you kind of have an atomization of content, whereby it's encouraging people to subscribe to individual writers, in Substack's case, rather than, say, the New York Times or indeed Bloomberg. So if you can support people across the spectrum of ideas, that's probably what Elon's going for, then you can make money from those people. And the way that social media works is that you don't necessarily need to be addressing the largest possible audience. You address a niche that has enough people within it to make you money. So if you can quite quickly get to high earnings numbers as an individual with just a few thousand subscribers. Now, if you're addressing the full range of opinions, there are a lot of different pockets within that you could start to capitalize upon.
Wow. And I thought it was interesting to hear from Twitter this morning. They say that I think they acknowledge Elon Musk's unsolicited offer. But what's the incentive for the board? I mean, how likely are they to approve this? And do they see this potentially as an upside in some of the ways that you were describing just now?
So the board has a fiduciary duty to generate the best returns possible for their shareholders. They do also have some social obligations. It's not just about the shareholders. And if you look at the share price of Twitter over the past year or so, Elon's been keen to talk up that this is a 54% premium to the share price at the end of January, which is when he started building his stake. But if you look at the way the share price evolved over the prior sort of 200 days, the average share price over the 200 days before that point in January was actually $57. So he's actually offered a bit of a discount to the moving average share price. On that basis, you could say he's getting something of a bargain. The flip side of that, of course, is that analysts also have a target price for where they think the shares are going to go over the course of the next year. Their target price is actually about $44. So on that basis, it's something of a premium. That means it's a tough decision for the board. They've got to say, well, do we back the ability of our CEO to send the share price higher than that $54? I would tend to think they probably would, but do shareholders agree with that? Do shareholders think that the CEO, Parag Agrawal, can take it in that direction? That's going to be the challenging decision that investors have to make.
And I know this is only the first step, Alex, so there's still a lot more to go. But if this were to go through, does this mean a lot of change for Twitter users? I mean, is Twitter really going to reinvent itself in the way that Elon is suggesting that he wants it to?
I mean, that is the $43 billion question, isn't it? I mean, he's clearly not buying it to keep it the way it is, right? That's when he talks about unlocking potential, about not thinking that the management team is good enough. That seems to herald significant changes. What are those changes? Is it going to be more targeted ads? As a user, I, from my own perspective, would not like to have more targeted ads than currently exist. If it's about adding more subscription services, well, maybe that's not such a big problem. If it's the edit button, I mean, I'm beyond caring about the edit button. Like, there are lots of small things that could happen, but the big question is, how is user data going to be exploited? And that's the question. That is something that would be a big concern, certainly for me.
That is a huge question. Alex, I feel like we're still going to have to talk about the edit button, but I feel your sentiment in talking about it too much. Quick Takes, Alex Webb in London. Thanks, Alex, for starting us off this morning. All right, we are diving into our focus of the day next on the future of femtech ahead of National Infertility Awareness Week, which starts on Monday. We're back in 2 minutes. This is Quick Take Charge. All right, it's time now for By the Numbers, where we give you the data that tells the story. This morning's number is 36 billion. Global in vitro fertilization, also known as IVF, is set to reach roughly $36 billion in market size by 2026. That's according to the Fortune Business Insights, which attributes increasing cases of infertility worldwide to the market's growth. And in case you're not familiar with IVF, it is a fertilization process that combines sperm and egg manually in a lab. It gives people who might not be able to conceive for various reasons an alternative way to get pregnant. According to Fertility Answers, the natural fertility rate is only about 20%, and 90% of infertility cases can be overcome through science. So that is why we are digging into the growing IVF market for today's focus of the day on femtech. Shonali Bassick is away doing bank earnings, but I'm really fortunate to have with us here in our New York headquarters, Paxton Mader-York, CEO and founder of A-Life Health, and also Dina Shacker, partner at Lux Capital, which invests in A-Life. Dina also sits on their board, and A-Life just announced a Series A fundraise of $22 million. Thank you both for being here. Paxton, I just wanted to start with you because there's a few IVF tech platforms that are out there that are trying to do something similar to A-Life. What makes A-Life different?
Yeah, great to be here again. Thanks for having us on. So one of the big differences between how we're approaching the problem and many of the other companies is really focusing on the entire solution and looking not just as a single step of the IVF process, but really trying to optimize every major stage of the patient journey in addition to the patient experience. So when we're thinking about IVF, there are multiple different stages, from helping the mother produce as many eggs as possible, to fertilizing those eggs into embryos, to selecting the best embryo to transfer, to ultimately transferring that embryo back into the mother. A-Life is working to leverage artificial intelligence and advanced analytics to improve every step of that process and sync that with a very easy to use patient application that improves the patient experience.
So Paxton, right now, it sounds like you're saying that the applications that are out there right now targets specific things, but taking maybe a more holistic approach is the way to tackle this issue?
Absolutely. And the other important aspect about anything in data science or AI is having a really diverse and very large data set. And A-Life has worked with many of the largest clinicians and clinics in the United States and internationally. And we have the largest and most diverse data set ever collected in this sector. And that allows us to find really important insights and also avoid any bias in our algorithms. And so it really differentiates us in terms of how we're thinking about the problem and the scale at which we're building solutions.
And Dina, I want you to jump in here because you are known to invest in a lot of women's tech-related, femtech as we're calling it. What about AI do you think is really sort of the differentiator right now in advancing women's health?
Thanks, Jennifer. Well, you know, at Lux, we invest in deep technology companies on the cutting edge of turning science fiction into fact. And fundamentally, the issues with infertility can be addressed through multiple platforms. There can be direct-to-consumer, content platforms. There can be care delivery platforms. But when it comes to improving outcomes and actually enabling families to have children, it goes down to the fundamental data set, as Paxton said. And A-Life is building the largest, the most diverse, that's actually reflective of the world that we live in. And starting with better data and advanced computer vision and artificial intelligence, you can actually drive towards better outcomes, better efficacy, better efficiency for clinics, and ultimately better health equity, which is a part of our thesis.
Can you talk about the data set? Because I think I've covered AI a lot, and that is a lot of the concern with AI. AI is that it's not representative. Paxton, maybe you can tell us what is the makeup of your data set, and how do you assure people that you are sort of including what the makeup of the country looks like, as Dina said?
Yes, so we have about 2.5 million rows of data in our data set, and this has been collected from all the largest clinics, both here domestically and internationally. And our demographics really wonderfully match one-to-one to the demographics of the United States. And unfortunately, we know that historically minority individuals have not been well represented in research across medical sectors and specifically in fertility. And so we're doing a lot of foundational research actually on how we can help groups of different minority patients have better outcomes, and we unfortunately know that minority individuals are more highly likely to have fertility struggles, but are less likely to receive care, and when they do receive care, are less likely to have successful outcomes. And so all of these things play in, and we're able to leverage our algorithms and our really pattern recognition enhanced with computers to figure out what we can do to improve those outcomes and deliver better care to all those individuals that are seeking support.
Dina, how is the medical community sort of basically reacting to some of these advancements? Are they on board with what it is that A-Life and others are doing, or are they still a little hesitant to trust some of these new technology advancements?
It's a great question. I mean, historically, there have been a number of companies that have emerged in purely, directing patients or consumers and working outside of the healthcare infrastructure. And we know in healthcare that it's difficult to scale, and that you need to work in partnership, in tandem with clinicians and experts. And so one of the many things that drove me to investing in A-Life is their incredibly robust clinical advisory board, their partnerships with some of the best and biggest clinics, not only in the U.S., but around the world. Some of the top clinicians have come on board as advisors and are endorsing it and working in tandem. And that's how they'll be able to actually work with patients and also ultimately improve the outcomes for the clinics and get to better health equity through ultimately reducing prices and the number of cycles required to have a healthy pregnancy.
When do we start seeing those numbers reflective, Dina? I mean, considering all the innovation that's happening, what is it that sort of you're waiting for to say that we're reaching this sort of next step in progressing this conversation forward?
Yeah, it's not a problem that's going to be solved with one solution, and that's part of why A-Life is building a platform. There's an issue around misinformation with fertility, starting with with the consumer side of things. There are challenges with even accessing care. There are only a certain number of clinics. If anyone is lucky enough to live near one, they have to wait months to get on, to actually get an appointment. The cost for a single cycle is incredibly prohibitive for most of the country. And so starting with the diagnostic ability to actually predict a healthy pregnancy using technologies, to take the process right now, which is incredibly analog and manual and can result in human error, and streamline that is ultimately what A-Life is seeking to do in clinics. But they're also going to be launching an incredible experience for patients as well, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, Paxton, maybe you can end on that, just sort of what the user should be expecting, because we just had a full screen up there, $25,000 for just one cycle of IVF. So what is it that A-Life is going to bring that down to, and when is the user going to see some of these advancements that Dina was talking about?
Yeah, so we're in the process of launching several of the components of our tech platform, and the future of IVF. We know that only about 1.6% of our births in the United States are through IVF, but globally that number should be much higher, closer to 5 or even 10%. And so what we're working to do is build a cohesive technology platform that can really push this industry to the next level, so that more patients can receive care and ultimately take home a baby at the end of the day. In terms of our technology, our patient app, which is going to be available to anyone going through IVF to help them stay organized, as well as integrate their support systems and their partners into the experience, is coming online later on this summer. We're running pilot sites as well as clinical studies to prove out the technology, and those are going to be launching on the AI side for the clinic a little bit later on towards the end of the year. And so patients that are interested should go to alifehealth.com, sign up for early access to our app. They should talk to their clinicians about whether or not they're expecting to use artificial intelligence patients to improve their ability to deliver top-notch care. And ultimately, we hope that this will be available to clinics near patients soon.
And Paxton, I just wanted to end on, because I think it's important to note that you are a male founder who is working towards advancing women's health. So I wonder sort of where do you get the guidance from? I mean, how much are you leaning on people like Dina or the clinicians? Sort of what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to have such a strong group of people surrounding the business, whether it's our all-female board or we're 50% actually majority women in leadership and the rest of the technical team, and then our incredible 30-person clinical advisory board who are really the top clinicians and doctors around the country and internationally in this sector are all advising us and supporting us and making sure that what we're building is truly going to be clinically meaningful and we're delivering against our core mission of personalizing and democratizing and modernizing fertility care globally.
Stay tuned. Paxton Mader-York, CEO and founder of A-Life Health, and also Dina Shacker, partner at Lux Capital. Thank you both so much for your time and for joining us at our headquarters this morning. All right, we're back in 2 minutes. This is Quick Take Charge.
We are a feminist tech brand. We are using tech to improve gender equality, to give women more control over their bodies. So I never had a plan to work in tech or become an entrepreneur. I was working in women's health and I became pregnant. And like many women, suddenly realized there's so many things that happen to our bodies that nobody talks about until they happen. And in fact, there's a huge number of health problems for women which can be easily prevented through technology. So what that means is actually I was pregnant, I was in a Pilates class, and my instructor said to me, Tanya, the most important thing you can do to look after your body is your pelvic floor exercises. And I didn't even know what it was. And I went home, started going through some of the scientific literature and realized it's a huge hidden epidemic for women, and actually one which has been completely ignored by technology. So basically I saw a problem which I knew could potentially be solved through technology and threw myself into that and starting LV.
So that was 2013 when the company got going, and your first product was the trainer. You can take a look at the first product that you created. Is that intentional, that you didn't want something that necessarily looks like a medical or clinical device, but actually something that looks like a gadget first? It just happens to also be an incredibly valuable thing for the people who use it.
Everything about the design is highly intentional. I would say two different spaces. You look at medical devices and they're designed in a very utilitarian way, and that's partly because of the way the business model works. You design a medical device, a doctor prescribes it to a patient, and you get it on prescription in the NHS. There's no real incentives to innovate or think about the consumer at the center of that design process. And then second, products for women, tech products for women. I think generally we oversimplify things, so we think it's an either or, like either it needs to be great tech or it needs to be beautifully designed. And tech companies in general have tended to focus on the aesthetic level, like let's make it beautiful, let's make it pink. But actually women want both, so, and especially because it's a very intimate product, so everything about it is beautifully and elegantly designed, but it's a piece of very high tech as well. And early days, like I literally had some engineers, so this was 5-6 years ago, and at that point, basically there's wireless charging in the case, and that's for specific hygiene reasons. You close it and it charges in there, and then when you take it out, it wakes itself up. And I literally had people say to me, do you think women are going to get this? This is pretty advanced tech. I'd be like, do you think women are not going to understand that you take it out and it wakes itself up? There's a lot of assumptions, particularly around the female consumer of tech, and an assumption that women don't really appreciate cutting edge tech. And I think what we've shown with LV is if you give women tech that solves a problem for them, of course they're going to convert and adopt that. In fact, be very much early adopters.
New York City has been accused of bias against gay men and its in vitro fertilization benefits for city employees. That's what the gay couple challenging the city is alleging. The couple, covered by New York's health plan, says that insurance coverage doesn't extend the same IVF benefits to gay men as it does to straight and lesbian couples, as well as single women. As a same-sex couple, the two men say they can't prove they meet the infertility requirement established by the IVF program. And this week, they asked the federal agency tasked with enforcing workplace anti-bias to take action. To discuss that more with us is Erin Mulvaney. She is a Bloomberg Law senior reporter, and she's been covering this for us. Erin, so can we just start with this case and sort of how this sort of gets to the broader discussion around inclusive coverage policies? What does it say to you?
Absolutely. This case represents a question that a lot of employers and insurers have as there's more expanded rights for LGBT workers. In this case, this gay couple says that compared to women, they aren't given the same benefits, which they are saying discriminates against their civil rights and federal civil rights law, New York civil rights law. And basically, they're saying that since a gay man can't be infertile, which is the requirement that the benefit has to get the benefit paid for. So they are saying it's basically impossible that they would even be able to take advantage of it, unlike a woman who could be fertile or infertile.
How likely are they to win this case, Erin? And what sort of precedent could it set for the rest of the industry and other people dealing with this?
That's obviously difficult to say whether they can win or not, but I can say that these types of cases have been percolating in the courts in recent years, particularly, and it's strengthened after a Supreme Court decision that expanded rights for LGBT workers. And where that is playing out is often in these cases about benefits, whether it be for fertility or other types of coverage to make sure that they're equal. At the end of the day, the civil rights protections just require someone who's suing to prove that they are being treated different than somebody in a similar situation just because of a protected category. In this case, it's that a man is getting a different protection or a different benefit, a different benefit than a woman. So at the end of the day, that's what they'll have to prove. And this is an early stage of this lawsuit. And so there's a long way to go.
And it's interesting when we talk about benefits, talking about it happening at the federal level as opposed to sort of in the private sector. I wonder if you're noticing whether there's more movement happening on the federal level to address some of these inequalities, or whether companies are taking it on themselves and just updating their own policies internally.
Actually, another big move in recent years have been from large Fortune 500 companies to expand policies for all LGBT workers. And this includes transgender workers and gay couples and expanding benefits. I think it's definitely a movement that private employers are taking on. I think that you'll see that there are gaps in knowledge of what protections on both local, state, and federal levels that LGBT workers have, maybe in a from smaller employers, but even if it's not intentional necessarily, there could still be a policy, like in this case, where a man is being treated differently than a woman, and that might not have been intentional, but still that's what they're suing over, and that you will see these things playing out in court.
And we're seeing the EEOC sort of getting involved as well, right?
I haven't seen them exactly take on a case, the EEOC itself. The case out of New York City was filed to the EEOC, and they were asking the EEOC to investigate the issue, and we will see what they do. The EEOC has definitely said that Title VII, which is the main federal civil rights law that protects these workers and protects the civil rights for all workers, they have definitely said that should extend to LGBT workers, and this includes benefits programs like this. So in that sense, yes, they've definitely made it clear that it can run afoul of the law if you treat workers differently.
And Erin, just yesterday we were talking about sort of the ramp up in anti-LGBTQ policies and legislation that we're seeing nationwide. I wonder if you've noticed a ramp up too, as we were talking about before, sort of considering what we're seeing happening from a lot of legislatures nationwide.
It's interesting. A lot of the legislation that we're seeing doesn't necessarily focus on the workplace and trying to roll back any workplace protections. And like I said, there's a lot of private employers have really honestly been ahead of the game before there were even secured before there was even like definite protections for LGBT workers under federal law. So I say that to say I think that where we'll see this play out from this perspective and in the workplace is probably in these ways that the New York City law, where you see the benefits, where you see maybe not being equal at this point and not being up to speed with where I think they'd like to see more equal protection. But we haven't yet seen it that what may seem like animus toward LGBT people play out in the workplace. I think for a long time, there's been a lot of progress, and I think some of that seems to a lot of people like a step backwards.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we talk about, too, sort of the future, how this all plays out when you think about technology and you think about policies and everything sort of coming at the same time. Erin Mulvaney, Bloomberg Law senior reporter. Erin, thanks so much for your time and for your reporting. Really appreciate that. All right, switching gears a bit now for this week's Unequal Recovery. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde spoke to a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution to see if inflation is a driver of inequality. Take a listen.
Certainly, the inflationary pressures have been a huge challenge. And as probably won't surprise your listeners, any economic challenge is going to be harder to face for lower income households. Any household that is less financially secure is going to have a harder time in the face of that economic shock, or for that matter, any economic shock. But the trade-off here isn't really so much of a trade-off, because I don't think monetary policymakers have a choice.
Okay.
We can either monetary policymakers can work to try to engineer a soft landing, which means that the economy can slow without a recession, or the economy is in for a far more difficult ride if monetary policymakers don't act. So we're in the mess we're in, and I think monetary policymakers have to act.
All right, and you can find out what Wendy thinks the economy needs to ease pressure in the rest of that interview. It'll be up later today on Bloomberg.com/equality. Thanks, Caroline, for that one. All right, that'll do it for Quick Take this hour. You can check out the latest stories at Bloomberg.com or at Quick Take on social media. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja. Thanks, as always, for watching.